Good morning, History 131. Hope everything is going well and everyone is staying safe. Today we're going to talk about European power and expansion, chapter 18 in your text. And we're going to talk about the Protestant and Catholic Reformation, as well as the crisis during the 1600s and the development of absolutism. And of course, colonial expansion into the Americas, North and South America. But the first 2 centuries, between 1500 and 1750, it opens the early modern era, and it also transformed Europe and the Americas. Now, I hope you've been following the PowerPoint slides I put on. I'm going to upload one more today. Also, while I'm at it, your only assignment for this semester will be uploaded today. And that's a 5-page research paper. But we'll continue on, again, 3 tests and a research paper. 4 grades for this class. You should be okay. Let's talk about this Protestant Reformation. Basically, it started under Martin Luther up in Germany, who launched the Protestant Reformation when he tacked his 95 Theses on the Castle of Wittenberg. The result of this movement created what is known as the Protestant Reformation, and this broke Christianity into half. After the Reformation, if you were a Christian, which I assume most of you are, if you're not Catholic, you are a Protestant. So Protestantism basically means to protest the Catholic Church. So Martin Luther, we've already talked about him, and I'm sure you are very familiar with him. In England, we see the break from the Catholic Church over a divorce. King Henry VIII, who starts the Anglican or the Episcopalian Church. Down in Switzerland and later France, we see John Calvin, who comes up with the concept of predestination, the concept that before you're born, your destination has been predetermined by God. But the Catholic did not stand still. Well, the issue that propelled Martin Luther to protest the church was the sale of indulgence, people thinking they could buy their salvation with gold and silver. But this concept was developed 300, 400, 500 years before Martin Luther to support the Crusades, the redemption of the Holy Land away from the infidel Muslims. But after the protests, the Protestant protests, the Catholic Church stopped selling indulgence, and they went back to more missionary work. And this is where we see orders developing, like the Society of Jesus, the Jesuits, who was prominently involved in the settlement of North and South America. But we also see the advent of religious violence, a civil war, and riots, and international conflict over this issue of religion. And these countries would compete with each other, and thousands would die over the issue of whether being a Protestant or Catholic. A civil war between Christians over their belief system. Now, what else do I need to tell you about this relief? But in the 17th century, at 1600s, we see crisis and rebuilding. Historians refer to this as the age of crisis because Europe was challenged by population loss, economic decline, and social and political unrest. Those who fared the worst were on the lower sprung. They are known as peasant, which is just a step up from slavery. Uh, in the 17th century, uh, we also see climate change, believe it or not, and nobody can explain this. It's called the Little Ice Age. This period of cold weather, accompanied by both rain, too much rain, and episodes of severe drought, resulted in the shortage of growing season, which led to crop yield. This created a famine, and many died from this famine that was created because of the climate change. Climate has a major effect on the behavior of man. I think you understand this with the migration from Africa to the north and across the Bering Straits. It's climate that determines the behavior, in many cases, the behavior of man. Uh, the other thing I want to tell you about this was that uh, industry also suffered. Now, what type of industry existed during this time? It's mainly the woven of wool, sheeps, and creating cloth and clothing, textile. Uh, it even led to what we call the 30-year War. Uh, and this to go along with the harsh conditions already in existence. And this created a decade-long conflict known as the 30-Year War. This happened after the deterioration of the Peace of Augsburg, which settles the conflict in Germany between the Catholics and the Protestant or Lutheran. That's what they're called. Basically, it was decided that if the prince or the ruler of that province was Catholic, the people that lived there would be Catholic. If the ruler was a Protestant, the people under his domain would be Protestant. But the Peace of Westphalia ended the 30-Year War, which mark a turning point in European history. It is a turning point, and it leads to more state building. But we also see the rise of a concept of government called absolutism. Rulers in absolute state asserted that because they were chosen by God, they were responsible to God alone. Under the rule of absolutism, monarchs claim exclusive power to make and enforce laws, denying any other institution or group the authority to check their power. We see the rise, particularly in France and the French absolutism led by King Louis XIV. Louis based his authority on the divine rights of king. He stated that God had established king as his rulers on earth, and they were answerable ultimately to him alone. And of course, the Habsburg, that's in Austria, adopted this concept of absolutism. The king or queen was the ruler. There was no parliament, there was no Congress. The will of the people be damned. But alternative did develop to absolutism, and we're going to talk about this. The alternative would be republicanism, a republic. That's America. And later, most of the European states. Republican, a republic form of government simply means a representative democracy. This concept was given to the world, developed for the world by the Roman Republic. A constitutional a representative democracy. I hope you understand that. Example would be your elected officials, Congress, president, city councilman, county commissioner, governors, legislators. Those are people who represent the people. But and this led to the failure of absolutism in England, where they demanded more participation. We see the rise of a group, the Puritans, who wanted to rebel against the Catholic Church, or remove the Catholic influence from the Catholic Church. This is the group that would later migrate to New England and Massachusetts and become the Pilgrims. But we also see the development of a constitutional monarchy, I mean, ruled by law, but ruled by one. And we see this in the Bill of Rights of 1789. But colonial expansion and empire building continues. We've already talked about the Spanish, the conquering of the Incas and the Aztecs, and the mining of silver and gold, which made them the most powerful country on earth, rivaling the Portuguese. So all these two countries, Spain and Portugal, on the Iberian Peninsula. But to the north, the Dutch, these Netherlands, England, France, all challenged the Iberian dominance, particularly in North and South America and in Asia and Africa. What else do I need to tell you about this chapter before we get on? So we enter into a period with these European nation state mercantilism. And of course, I told you about the Columbian Exchange. That's been the best example of mercantilism that developed in the Americas, and the exchange of goods and ideas. I'm going to post that slide again when I upload this. But we also in Asia, Eurasia, we see the rise of the Russian Empire and the Russians turning towards the West for inspiration. This is led by Peter the Great and, of course, his descendant, Catherine the Great. So, what else do I need to tell you? Well, in closing, as Spain powers weakened, other European nations bordering the Atlantic Ocean sought their own profit and glory from overseas empire, with England emerging in the early 18th century with distinct advantages over its rivals. Henceforth, war among European powers would include conflict over territories and trade and in colonies. European rulers increased control over their own subjects, thus went hand in hand to the expansion of the European powers in the world. Okay. So, the expansion that we're going to talk about later, particularly when we get into the Atlantic revolutions, Europe would divide up North and South America. The English would establish colonies on the Atlantic seaboard. The French would go into Canada, Detroit, Chicago, all the way down the Mississippi to New Orleans. The Spanish, of course, had Florida, Cuba, the Caribbean, Mexico, South America. The Portugal would have Brazil. The Dutch would get a toehold in South America, but mainly their emphasis would be in Southeast Asia. So, very interesting chapter. Go back and read this if you get a chance. And I'm going to upload for you your study guide for the first test and your first assignment, your research practice. Be blessed, stay safe, see you next week.